morning and welcome to Future Choices. My name is Fran Snedeker and I am the producer and moderator of this educational series exploring reproductive health issues. Several months ago on Future Choices, Vicki Markham, the CEO of Center for Environment and Population, you might remember her presentation, she said in essence that a true environmentalist has got to be a strong advocate for family planning and reproductive health. Pursuing this theme, I've come today to Washington, D.C. to speak to the Population Action International. Roger Mark, who is the Vice President of Research and Director of Climate Program at Population International, is here with us today. Roger, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Fran.
This is what PAI's website says about the interrelationship of the environment and reproductive health care. Population Action International believes that family planning and natural resource conservation remain an essential catalytic combination that can bring communities quickly closer to broad-based economic development, improved health and environmental stability. That's a very strong statement. Why does the Population Action International believe so strongly in the interrelationship of population health and in the environment, Roger?
I think it's a very good question, Fran, and I agree with you. It is a very strong statement. And the reason it's such a strong statement is because it's the strong voice that we have heard from individuals and families that we have spoken with in developing countries. And they have said to us, we do not live our lives in silos. We live our lives in a very integrated fashion. We fully understand and appreciate that the way we interact and have an impact on the environment affects our well-being, and that is connected to the number of families and people that we have in our families. So they have said to us, we don't live our lives in a siloed way, and this makes sense. When we've spoken to policymakers in developing countries, they have also said to us that they hear from their constituents that these issues are related and that any investments they can make in programs that bring these issues together will allow them to have a better return on those investments. So they like it because it is very cost effective. And finally, as you noted in the statement, we recognize that an integrated approach linking population, health, and environment allows us to have broad-based benefits that relate to issues around poverty alleviation.
Now, that was a very helpful explanation. You probably expounded upon the same principles when you were at the latest UN conference on the climate in Cancun. The Wall Street Journal asserted in a follow-up article that the conference about allegedly warming climate was a total failure, that its biggest achievement was suntans for the participants. Presumably, you do not fully agree with the journal's rather derisive assessment of the achievements of the conference?
That's a very interesting assessment. I was there and I did not get a suntan, so I don't fully agree. But it was very interesting to me. When I think of the current state of climate negotiations, I think back to 1992 and the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. And I think that was really a landmark conference because it allowed us to, as a global community, to put in place a number of agreements and organizing principles around safeguarding the environment and human well-being. Mm-hmm. And this is the same feeling that I have when I think of Cancun. It's important to note that the climate change deliberations and negotiations that recently took place in Cancun came after the United Nations Framework on Convention for Climate Change Conference of Parties meeting that happened in Copenhagen. And in Copenhagen, those discussions were generally felt to not be very positive and not have accomplished much. I think and I believe that the feeling from Cancun is different. Overall, on the official negotiating side, Cancun was successful because there were a number of agreements about dealing with developing countries adapting to climate change, about putting in place mechanisms for financial support for climate change adaptation, for recognizing the importance of transparency in international negotiations around climate change, and in recognizing the importance of looking at issues around deforestation and conservation of forests. So from a negotiating point, and the official discussions were successful in that regard, particularly coming after Copenhagen. The other aspect of it, which links again to thinking about the non-profit, non-governmental sector, where I think Cancun was very successful, was that the Mexican government created a forum where there was a lot of exchange and information sharing among the non-profit, non-governmental sector. Mm-hmm. So PAI, Population Action International, as an NGO, was there, was present, and convened a number of events that allowed a number of our international partners to better understand and appreciate how population dynamics affect climate change. We conducted an advocacy training for partners from India, the Philippines, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and the United States to begin to understand how population and climate change are linked and to think about what they can do in their respective countries. We also organized an official side event that focused on women's empowerment, climate change, and resilience. It's a very important word, resilience, when you think about climate change. There are generally two aspects of looking at climate change. The first is mitigation, and the second is adaptation or resilience. And mitigation deals with the key components that we need to think about to curb climate change, to stop climate change from happening. The second, adaptation or resilience, is important to recognize that certain elements of climate change are already in place and will continue, and that we need to adapt and improve our resiliency to those changes. And what has emerged coming out of those discussions at Cancun was that resiliency is a very important concept. It's very directly linked to women's empowerment and the well-being of their families, and that family planning and access to reproductive health services and delivery has a very important role to play in increasing women's empowerment and increasing resilience and the well-being of families.
Okay, I'm still a little slow about making that link between family planning and certainly I can see the family planning as the empowerment of women, but link me a little bit more to the resilience idea, please.
So when you look at the ways that women function within families and within society, there is a recognition of the traditional roles and responsibilities that they have as caregivers, as food gatherers, particularly in developing countries. And I'm reminded of this when I think of one of our partners that we've been working with in Ethiopia, and a young woman who we spoke with in Ethiopia who lives in a rural agricultural area that's heavily populated, high population density, said to us, you know, climate change really has been making a difference to me and my life and has made me more vulnerable. And what has happened because of climate change, the rainfall patterns have changed in her district so that they're no longer able to plan for their planting seasons as they previously did. So her husband has been forced to move out of the area where they live to find an area where he can plan for his agricultural production. And this has meant that she, as a young mother, she's 32 years old and has 6 kids, is left at home needing to think about how she will provide for her children. And she has said, I've come to the realization, because of these changing variable patterns of rainfall influenced by climate change, that it has affected the family dynamics. My husband has had to move out of where we live to find ways to provide for the family. I'm left on my own with 6 children to provide for, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this. So she says, I have become more vulnerable, and really I would wish that I had less children. And I've been speaking to other women in my community, and they said, yes, I too, I want to have less children and hope that I can access the services that will allow me to make those decisions. So we see women's vulnerability increasing because of climate change, and the provision of family planning services will help make them more resilient when they're able to determine how many children they can have and when they can have it.
Now, what is Population Action International's role in making this happen?
So that's a very good question about Population Action International's role. Certainly we are involved in public education. Our overall mission is to work towards providing increased access to contraceptives so that women may live in a productive and environment where they're able to provide for the well-being of their family and in a safe and clean environment. We do this through research and helping the public better understand what the research has to say about these linkages, but also in particularly reaching out to U.S. policymakers so that they can better understand and use that evidence about the importance of family planning to these broader issues in legislative discussions and in making decisions around appropriations for funding of international family planning and development programs. Additionally, we work with a number of partners in developing countries to help support their programs in their countries, to help them advocate for these issues within their countries, and for them to have a better appreciation and understanding of the effects of U.S. policies on their well-being abroad. We have also discovered that many individuals, policymakers, and the public appreciate the fact that Population Action International is able to disentangle how population variables and dynamics relate to issues such as climate change, development, security, and financing. And people have come to rely on us for a careful and critical analysis of how those issues are linked and what they can do about those issues.
And do many of the policymakers in the countries where you're working get it? Do they comprehend the interrelationship of these factors?
Some of the challenges that we face in getting policymakers in developing countries to take action is at times the way that their funding is allocated is in a very siloed way. So it's specifically for the environment, specifically for health, and it's not necessarily easy for them to make those linkages. In countries such as the Philippines, where there's decentralized budget allocation and planning, we find that we're able to make quite significant progress at a subnational level. So within a community, a village, or a municipality, where policymakers at that level, a local mayor, for example, has some say over the budget, and he or she also hears from his constituents that these issues are linked and make sense, and that there are concrete benefits to be derived from implementing policy. So overall, yes, there is a general recognition that's happening in the context of a broader understanding and appreciation of how these issues all come together.
Now, Roger Mark, in January, I attended a live broadcast of NPR's Talk of the Nation, which was held at the National Geographic headquarters here in Washington, D.C. It was in celebration of the January issue of the National Geographic magazine, which focused on climate change. It was asserted there that population pressures have little to do with climate change. The real culprit, at least this is what I heard them saying, was lack of economic opportunities as per unfortunate land tenure policies in developing countries which consign farm families to hopeless poverty. I don't hear you saying the same thing?
No, I would say, first of all, let me congratulate National Geographic on really addressing the issues around 7 billion. The world's population is anticipated to arrive at 7 billion this year. So this is an important landmark and an opportunity for dialogue and conversation and how these issues are linked. I would say we very firmly believe that population dynamics, and it's not just population growth, not just the absolute numbers, but issues around migration, urbanization, the composition of the population, the amount of young people in the population, the amount of elderly people in the population, all interact with climate change in real, meaningful ways. Some of those ways are related to questions of vulnerability. Some of those issues are related to population pressures in urbanized areas. For example, in coastal areas, globally, we have recognized that more than 50% of the world's coasts have become urbanized coasts. And there are increased pressures in those coastlines, which of course is tied to questions around disasters and disaster mitigation with climate change patterns, and also questions around food security. And that, of course, happens in a context of economics. So it's all linked. The questions around food security, disaster, coastlines, urbanization, and the economics. But it's quite clear that population dynamics have a real and valuable role with regard to climate change, and it is an issue that communities themselves live and experience directly and feel should be addressed. I would say to you, a few years ago, I was in Thailand working on some post-construction work after the tsunami hit, and a woman said to me, you know, I look at my family. I've lost some family members. I live in a very urbanized area on this coastal region that was hit by the tsunami, and many of the natural barriers that we had were cut down for the development of the tourism industry. It's quite clear, she said to me, that we were all moving into this area because of the tourism industry, that there's very high population density, and we need to think about what this means in terms of how climate change affects our well-being and the economic opportunities that then encourage population mobility. So it's quite clear that there are a number of linkages that communities on the ground feel and recognize are very real for them.
Well, they said further at that broadcast that population, the rate of population growth is falling fast. And so we don't need to concentrate on population control. Is that what you're talking about?
I would say it's really important for us to have a much broader context. Certainly in many countries, population rates, fertility rates are falling, particularly in Europe. However, overall, in the developing world, population growth rates continue to be high. And we recognize that really it's not a question of population control. That implies someone externally coming in and imposing what should happen in terms of population numbers or how many children a family or woman should have. I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, there was a film with Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt. It was called What Women Want. Well, I will tell you, what women want is access to family planning services so that they can voluntarily determine how many children they should have and when they should have those children. And I will say to you that I know this through conversations with my grandmother and my mother who live in the Caribbean, through my wife who is from France, and through my nieces who are American. So I look at these questions and I see intergenerationally across developed countries that there's a strong demand for family planning services, and that unmet need continues. The investment that the US government has put into international family planning programs has been successful. It has increased the contraceptive prevalence rate. In the 1960s, it was about 10%. Today, it's about 70%. So we've had very good success in providing access to voluntary family planning, which once again, this is what women want. Yet today, there are roughly 215 million women in developing countries who still are not taking the decision to not have the children that they don't want to have. They want to not have these children, yet they're not able to do so. So this unmet need for family planning continues to be very high. And we know that this will continue to increase, and that the investment of the US government in these programs internationally, it has been very successful. And once again, it's what women want.
You have certainly laid out the challenges and the possibilities of what could happen for women and their families if we pay attention to these realities. But my reading of the political realities in Washington are not so happy. How do you envision this coming year as we begin a new Congress?
Certainly the results of the midterm elections are not very encouraging for us. But we recognize that we're looking towards a year that will be, I think, very exciting and invigorating for us, because there are lots of opportunities. We continue to recognize that in poll after poll, the majority of Americans feel that family planning services are important and should be supported. The numbers indicate over a decade of polling that roughly 75% or 90% of Americans support international family planning services, particularly because these are being offered in a voluntary context. And that is true even for Republicans and independents. The numbers show that 69% of Republicans and independents support family planning programs. So there is always a political dimension to these issues, yet at the same time there is general support among the American public. And there is a recognition that if we move beyond the politics, that these are interventions that are really important, that make a difference. They're strong investments, they're voluntarily being implemented, and that they're real opportunities for change. So we continue to work within that context, recognize that there will be possibilities of looking at the science behind these issues, and that there may be questions around appropriations for international family planning and international development assistance. And we will continue to work with partners across the aisle to continue to convey these messages and present the evidence that these are real interventions that improve the well-being of women and families. And I would say I feel very encouraged when I have these discussions with my neighbors, my friends, my family, and my children. I'm the father of 2 teenage boys, 2 young men, and I am really intrigued at their generation and how much they appreciate and value the interplay of these issues. And I wondered to myself, is this a reflection of this generation and where they are? Or is it because they are sons of someone who works on these issues? And I talk to their friends, these other teenage boys, and I am buoyed and encouraged to see how they get it. They understand it. They know what women want. And I think if we move beyond just the politics of today and also look at investing in youth and what it means for the future, that we're looking towards a bright future, we must recognize the challenges that we will face and listen to our opponents. It's very important, and find opportunities for mutual dialogue and understanding. And that's what we will be focusing on this year.
And certainly Population Action International, with its very highly skilled and mission-oriented staff, is very busy. But what role is there for those of us in the TV audiences watching this program, the 60% of us in the United States who really want you to succeed in your work?
I think that's a really good question. What could you do at home? I think there are a number of things that you could be thinking about. First is some of our partners, like the Sierra Club, host house parties that are called green pink parties. Green because of the environment, and pink because of reproductive health family planning. And they have a discussion guide that you can find on their website, sierraclub.org, under the Population Program, where you can have discussions with your friends, families, and neighbors on these issues. So host a green pink house party. Also, you can make presentations in your communities, in your churches, in areas where you get together to talk about how these issues are related and what it means for you and your family. I would also encourage you to keep engaged. Go to Population Action International's website, populationaction.org, and you would get some information there about what's happening in terms of current policies, fact sheets. We have information about documentaries that we have produced. So there's a lot of information there that you can use. I recently shared the information on the website with a friend of mine, and she described it as wickedly cool. So if you're looking for some wickedly cool information on these things, just go to Population Action International's website. Also be an advocate. Write to your senator, write to your representative and say, this is important. We need to look at appropriations, we need to look at support for family planning, and think about what it means for us here in the United States and internationally. And finally, let me share with you a recent documentary that we produced here at Population Action International called Empty-Handed, that talks about cases of providing access to reproductive health services and supplies. You can go on our website, populationaction.org, and get information about the film. It's a very short, interesting documentary, and you can receive copies of it, and you can host a film screening at your house and talk to your friends and neighbors about it. So make a presentation, host a party, keep informed, be an advocate, and host a film screening. There are many things that you can do, and we need your support. In fact, we rely on your support.
Well, I thank you very much, Roger Mark. You have given us a lot to think about and a lot of encouragement that we, right here in Westchester County, can be a part of the action that will make a huge difference, not only to our community, but to the world and the world's the future of our climate and the well-being of our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fran. Yes, you can be part of the action, and you can be part of Population Action International. We welcome you.